I bring you greetings from wherever you are. This is Real Apparel's online sewing class. I hope you are all doing well. In today's episode, we are coming to learn how to dart a regular Ankara or African print skirts. And then there are two ways of darting it. A dart is a sewn in parts found in garments to give shape. So if you want to sew any of your Ankara fabrics, you can either dart your skirt this way or give an illusional panel line. We are not going to divide these pieces. We are just going to stitch. There is a way of stitching it. So we are going to learn is either you cut your fabric and then dart this way, or you cut and then you dart this way. Now let's look at our fabrics. We will need lining. So I have two fabrics here. I have this beautiful print and then this one too for this style. So you need your fabrics, you need your lining, you need zip, and then your matching thread. So let's quickly go into our cutting. So I'll cut this first. As we already know, if we want to sew any skirt at all, whether stretchy or African print, we need our waist measurement, we need our hip measurement. You definitely need hip depth, waist to knee, skirt length, and then because we are introducing that in today's episode, we would use nipple to nipple measurements. The nipple to nipple measurement is 1 point from your nipple to the other point of the nipple. When we are darting any garment or a dress or a skirt, we need to dart along the nipple line. We don't dart away, or we don't narrow the dart. So every individual has her own nipple to nipple measurement. So if you want to take that measurement, you place your tape measure on 1 point of your nipple and then to the other point of your nipple. Mine is 7.5. So this is how you take your nipple to nipple measurement. Now let's get to our cutting. For the cutting, I always recommend that you cut your lining first. As beginners, we have to cut our lining first, so in case we do any mistake along the line, we don't get to destroy our fabric. Lining is cheaper than the fabric, so definitely when you cut the lining first and you make any mistake, you can quickly get another lining and then you do your corrections. From our previous episode, we said that when we want to fold our fabric, we need to fold it quarter hip. We are using the hip because the hip is the widest part of the body. That is why we are using the hip to divide. So if this client's hip is 40, that means we are going to divide the body into 4. We are going to divide the measurement into 4. The reason we divide the measurement into 4 is for our bodies, we have front and then back. When we take the front, for example, we can fold the front into 2, because whatever I have on my left hand side, I have the same thing on my right hand side. So I can divide my front into 2, giving me half, and then I can divide my back 2 into 2, so I'm going to get quarter. That is why we divide our measurements by quarter. So 40 divided by 4 is going to give me 10. So I'm going to fold my fabric quarter hip plus, let's say, 2 inches. So quarter hip is 10 plus 2 inches will give me 12. Then I fold my fabric this way, my lining, this way. After that, you have the skirt length. From after folding, you have to get the skirt length. So in getting the skirt length is 25. I am going to plot my 25 from the hem. This is my hem of the hem of my fabric. So I'll plot my 25 from this hem to get my 25. Then I square across. So from the upwards is going to be my waistline. So this is where we are going to draft our skirt. When you get your waistline, the rule says we have to get our hip line. In getting our hip line, we are going to plot our hip depth measurement. So I'll quickly plot my hip depth measurement, which is 8.5, and then plot my waist to knee, that is 19, and then I'll square this line across. So this is my waistline, this is my hip line, this is my knee line, and then this is my hem. If you would notice, I didn't add any seam allowance to my lining, hem allowance to my lining. I used the exact 25. When we are going to put the lining on the fabric, we are going to allow some excess down there. So if your measurement is 22, make it 22. If it is 18, make it 28 without any hem allowance. Now when you get these lines, it's time for you to shape. And we already know that when we want to shape, we have to plot quarter measurements of the shaping. So the waist is 29. When I divide 29 by 4, I'm going to get 7.25. Now this is the easiest way to do your division. Don't use your phone to calculate any measurements. You take where your 0 point is, put it on the measurement you are going to divide. I'm using 29, so you put it here. This is divided by 2, so divided by 2, I'll get 14.5. Then I place 0 at 14.5 and divide again. This is the easiest. I have my 7.25, so 7.25. Then you mark your 7.25. You add your 1.5. I'm using seam allowance of 1.5, so I'll add 1.5 seam allowance. If you want to use half an inch seam allowance, you plot. If you want to use 1 inch seam allowance, you plot. Now, as you can see on the board, the dart of the skirt is introduced on the waistline. So after adding your seam allowance, you have to add your dart width. And with this lesson, our dart width is 1.5. Dart widths are not permanent. They varies. The wider the hip of the client, and when the waist too is smaller, you need a bigger dart width. But for normal, you can use 1 or 1.5. It will work. So this is what I did: quarter waist measurement plus seam allowance 1.5 plus dart width 1.5. Then I come to the hip line. The hip is divided into 4. So 40 divided by 4, we are going to get 10. So you drop that here, add your 1.5 seam allowance. Then because we are doing this, at this point, I won't add anything there. So this is the difference. Please kindly note, on the hip line, we are doing this one. So on the hip line, just plot your quarter hip measurement plus 1.5 or 1 seam allowance. On the waistline, we plotted quarter waist, seam allowance, dart width. On the hip line, it's just quarter hip plus seam allowance. Now we are going to the knee. The rule says that whatever you get on the hip line, whatever you get, the final measurement you get on the hip line, minus 1 and plot on the knee line. So I add 11.5. I'll take away 1. I'll get 10.5, and then I plot. Now it's time to shape. With the help of a straight rule, you join the hip to the knee, and then because you are joining 2 points together, it will definitely help you get the hem shaping. So even if it is long, you continue on that stretch and you are going to get a perfect fit. Then with the help of a skirt curve, you also place it on this way, then you curve. Please do not start curving with this curvy part this way. is going to give you a false hip or awkward. See the difference? If you use the end here, this is what you are going to get. This will give you excess false hip. But then if you come up like 4 or 3.5 inches down, you are going to get a perfect shape. So if I were you, I can quickly measure either 4 inches or 4.5 or even 5 from this side, then mark it. This is for one of my students, so we marked this side. So anytime she's going to sew a fitted, she's going to do a shaping, she starts from here and then it works perfectly. Now that women are made of curves, so we don't leave the waistline straight. From here, from the side of the skirt, you go up 1/2 inch to curve in to the waistline. 1/2 inch, then curve into the waistline. So this is what we have. Then we quickly cut our shape. So easy, huh? Do not forget to, we have our cutting instructions below this video, so you can check on our cutting instructions too. You can jot it somewhere. Now it's time to cut the back, and for the back all we need is our zip extension. So I'll put my front on a folded piece and then allow 1.5 zip extension at the center back. So making sure I have 1.5, 1.5, then you pin. Now let's cut. We have our skirts. So with Ankara that we are introducing, that please add 1.5 that width to your waistline. That is all. Now let's cut our fabric. I don't like wasting my fabric. Now if you remember, we didn't add any allowance to the hem, so I'm going to make the fabric greater than the lining by 2 inches. This is to face our skirts so that nobody sees the lining doesn't come out. So this is to face our fabric lining this way, and then the excess is for stitching and all that. So 2 inches is perfect. Then you place it on it this way. We are cutting the same thing, just that you just allow 2-inch hem allowance, then you cut. Please, I've been doing this for a long time. Kindly pin your fabric together so that it doesn't my fabric. I don't like wasting fabrics at all. So 2-inch hem. Please kindly pin. Kindly pin. So we are on our second skirt, the paneled one. I've already ruled my lines, my waist, my hip, my knee, my hem. So let me plot the client's quarter. The quarter waist is 31, so divided by 4 will give me 7 3/4. 1.5 seam allowance, 1.5 dart width. Quarter hip is 42. Quarter hip of 42 is 10.5. So 10.5 plus 1.5 seam allowance. Now this is where the difference is. Since we are going to stitch an illusional panel, I am going to add extra 1/2 inch to the hip line to take care of this panel. The previous one, this is the difference. For the previous one, which is this, the dart that ends here, you just add seam allowance without anything. But for panel ones, you need a dart stitching. So if you want dart stitching of 1/2 inch, you add 1 inch. Dart stitching of quarter, you add 1/2 inch. I'm going to stitch down 1/4 inch. So if I fold my fabric this way and stitch quarter, that means I'm stitching quarter in front and quarter at the back. That is why I'm adding 1/2 inch to my hip line. So this is the difference from the two. At the hip line, you do not add anything on the hip line. But with this one, you add dart stitching to the hip line, and I prefer stitching my darts from the hip 1/4 inch. And because I'm going to stitch quarter in front and quarter behind, I am adding 1/2 inch to it. Then from there, I quickly record all this. I have 12.5 minus 1 inch, 11.5. Then I shape as usual. This is what we have for the back. Always allow your, it's the same thing, your 1/2 inch I have my assistant here. She's perfect. She's coming to help me with both skirts. So if we should quickly do this, the only difference is that with this one, the paneled one, you are going to add that stitching that will run down here. But for the first one, just plot the hip, on your hip, just plot your seam allowance, side seam allowance, that's all. But with the paneled one, you are going to allow seam allowance and then that stitching. So Perfect is going to pin for us. So Perfect, kindly pin this one for us. And then with the pinning, so we are pinning on the right side. We are putting the lining on the right side of the fabric. This is the right side of the fabric. So when you open your skirt piece, place the lining on the right side. We are working on the hem first. So we pin the hem, just the hem. Then after pinning, we are going to stitch 1/2 inch. You stitch here 1/2 inch. So we'll be back. After stitching your 1/2 inch, you edge stitch your seam for it to lie down flat. After that, you press, you pull this way, so you see our SS. So this is creating a kind of a facing for it. So I'm going to pin and then pin. So if in case there is any excess of fabric, kindly cut it off so that it doesn't add up to our measurements. Now it's time to plot our darts. If we want to do our darts, we fold our skirt into quarter again, this way, and then we press. So this will be our center line. where the fold is our center line. Now to plot the that, we need our nipple to nipple measurement, and for this client we said her nipple to nipple is 8. So since we've divided our front into 2, we are going to divide the 2 into 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. But this is what we are going to do. We will fold from the center here, measure 4 inch, and then fold. Then the hem 4 plus half, add half an inch to it. So this, if this is 4, this will give you 4.5. If this is 3, this will give you 3.5, which is the hem. Then you press. So after pressing, this is the center line. This is one point of the nipple, and this is the other point of the nipple. We said the client's nipple is 8. So this side will give me 4, this side will also give me 4. And then for the hem, it's going to be 4.5, 4.5. So I'll take one part of the hem this way. If you would remember, that width was 1.5, right? So we'll divide our 1.5 into 2, because we've divided the dart position 2 into 2. So divide the dart width into 2, which will give you 3/4. Then from the center, mark 3/4 on the waistline. This way, mark 3/4 on the waistline. Now to get your dart width measurement is determined by the hip depth minus 2. It is rule. This is just like science. We having formulas for matter and concentration and energy and all that. So this is our formula for creating our dart length for this one. So every dart length is determined by the hip depth minus 2. So if your hip depth is 9, minus 2 will be 7. That will be your dart width. But sometimes I see people doing that with 5, 4.5, 5. Please, it is not constant. It is determined by your hip depth measurements. So if this client's hip depth was 8.5, minus 2 is going to give me 6.5. That will be the length of my dart. Then from the 0 points to the 3/4, so it will give you something like a V. So this is my dart. This will be my dart for this style. You first fold your fabric into half. Locate your nipple to nipple points. That is, if it is 7 divided by 2 will be 3.5, but this client is 8, so divided by 2 gave me 4. Then from the 4 I divided it again, then I got these 3 lines. 1, 2, 3 lines. So this side is for one of my darts, and then this side is for the other dart. So let's work on the other dart too. So this is our second nipple line. I'll measure 3/4. Please, the dart width, it is not fixed. You can use 1 inch. If you plot 2 inches, that means you are going to get 1 inch here, because it is folded into 2. Now from here, I know my dart length is 6.5. The dart length too, please, it is not fixed. It is not fixed. It is nipple. If you want a correct dart length for a client, it is hip depth minus 2. Hip depth minus 2. If you use this method, you are going to take away the excesses that comes around this side. You see, when some people sew fitted skirts for you, you get this balloon beneath your abdomen. This is to take care of it. If you make it shorter, if the person's hip depth is down like 9 and you make it 5, you are going to get some room here. That is why we use this formula, and it will work perfectly for you. So we are going to stitch this side. We'll do same to the back. This is the back. I have ironed my 1.5 zip extension. So I am coming to cut through. Please make sure you are cutting through the middle of your skirt. So this is my back. Then fold your zip extension in. Now it's time to do our darts. We know the nipple to nipple is 8, so divided by 2 is 4. So from the center you fold 4. Then at the hem is 4.5. This is to give your dart shape. Then quickly plot your dart width, dart length, 6.5, 3/4. Then you join. This is for the first one. This is what we have. We are going to stitch up to here. Then we will do same to the stitch, and then we continue. So this is our middle line. This is our nipple or dart line. So as we know, this skirt, this piece was for this, the one with the panel. So this is what we are going to do. As usual, we are going to plot our 3/4 on the waistline, because our dart width was 1.5, and then dart length is 6.5. But unlike this one that we ended here, at this point we added 1/2 inch to the hip line. So from this point I'm going to mark 1/4 inch. So this is going to give me my panel after stitching. So this is the difference. For the first one, we never added allowance to the hip, that stitching allowance to the hip. That is why we ended here. But for this one, we are going to create an illusional panel line. That is why we added 1/2 inch that stitching to the hip line. So from this point, after plotting your dart width, dart length, at that point measure quarter. So after stitching, your 1/2 inch will be gone. So we are going to stitch on this line to the end and do same to this one. Then we come back. I've used different fabric so that we can really see the stitching. So as you can see, I have used different thread to stitch so that we see. This is the paneled one. So after I plotted my 3/4, I plotted quarter down. So when we turn to the right side, we see our panel line, but we didn't divide the pieces. This is just a sewn in, and this is my favorite type of skirts. So at this point, we are coming to put the back on it and then shape. So with this one, as you can see, we are done with the stitching. So it is time for us to shape. So you put the right side together and then measure your 1.5 seam allowances. Then you shape. After shaping, you stitch on it. So we stitch and then fix our band and then our zip. We'll be back. So we finished fixing our band and then our zip. So for the band, you can check our previous video on fitted skirts. You know how to fix the band, and then how to fix the zip is in that same video. So this is the our final look. So as you can see, this is the plain one, the first one, the one without stitching, that stitching allowance at the hip. And this is the illusional panel line. With this one, we added 1/2 inch that stitching on the hip line, but with this one we didn't add anything to the hip line for the darts. It is 1/4 hip plus seam allowance. With this one, we made it 1/4 hip. With this one, we made it 1/4 hip plus 1/2 inch dart stitching to give us this line, then our seam allowance. Now after ironing, we have to hem. We have 2 ways of hemming. You can either use your hemming stiff, or hem stay, or hem it to place the seam back zip extension on the lining, or you can hem it. So if you want to hem, you first secure the thread, and then you pick the fabric in front of you. Please, when you are picking the fabric, don't pick the one here, just pick the one up here. As you can see, it is 2, so pick the one up here. Then you move forward in the neatening. Then you pick the down fabric, leaving this side, so this side will be clean. Then you move forward in between your neatening. Then you pick, I'm using different fabrics, so different threads, so that you can really see what I'm doing. But then as you can see, still neat. Move forward, you pick this fabric, the upper one. Please do not pick this way. You see, when you pick this way, you can see the needle here. That means the thread will be visible on the right side. So please just pick the lining or the fabric that you can see. Just pick it this way. Move forward until you meet this side, or you iron your slits or your shaba. Kindly iron it. Take a reasonable amount of the hem stay or the hemmit or the hemming stiff. Place it in between your zip allowance, in between the zip allowance and then the skirts. Fold it back and then you press. Hem there, you see. So as the hemming stiff melts, it will get attached to the fabric. So anytime you wash and then you iron, it will go back to this position. So sewing has become very simple for us. This method is very quick. Right now, skirts. I hope this lesson will be very, very useful to you. and then I'm going to get a feedback. If you want the sewing and then cutting instructions, it has been typed beneath this video, so you can also use that instructions to either cut or sew. So this is what we have. Very, very lovely. So for the last time, this plain one, we do not add that stitching on the hip line. If this is the hip line, it is just hip plus seam allowance. But for this one, it is hip plus seam allowance plus that stitching. So this is the two difference for this. To keep this love affair going on, kindly subscribe to this channel. We have wonderful packages coming your way. You can also follow us on Instagram at Real Apparels on Instagram. We are also on Facebook. And then if you want any special dress for yourself, you can also follow us there. Get into our DM and then we get talking. Thank you for your time. See you soon. Bye bye.